Hello. Welcome to the Walrus Talks. I am Shelagh Ambrose, Executive Director and Publisher of the Walrus. We are here. That is lovely. Thank you. We are here on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people in Canada's capital city, and we're grateful to be in a place with such a rich history. And I want to thank you for being here at the National Gallery of Canada tonight. There's always so much going on. We appreciate your choosing to spend some time with us, especially on such a gorgeous September evening. This optimistic project called The Walrus started 15 years ago, and our goal is to create forums for conversations about Canada and its place in the world. Canada's conversation is complex and necessary and takes many forms. Journalism in the Walrus magazine and at thewalrus.ca, in the Walrus books, the Walrus podcasts, and in rooms like this at the Walrus Talks. No matter where the Walrus is or how it is consumed, we embrace our commitment to be fact-based, live, human fact-checkers at all times, and independent, and to bring together interesting and interested people who care about the issues that matter. So some of you have played this game before. Hands up if you read The Walrus. Yes. And hands up if somehow, either by subscribing or donating, you support fact-based journalism at The Walrus financially. You are my people. Thank you. This event is our 95th Walrus Talks. Hands up if you've been to a Walrus Talks before. Hands up if you've given a Walrus Talk. Welcome, Walrus Talkers. Hands up if you're brand new. Let's welcome the new people. Yay. So we are once again thrilled to be working with the amazing people behind the Order of Canada. Since 1967, the Order of Canada has recognized individuals for outstanding achievement, dedication to the community, and service to the nation. The Latin motto of the Order of Canada translates into, "They desire a better country." That motto is also the mantra of the Walrus, "We desire a better country." And we are honored to feature 7 of the about 3,500 living companions, officers, and members of the Order of Canada to join us on stage tonight to talk about connections of all kinds. Through their varied work, each of tonight's illustrious speakers have enriched the lives of others and made a big difference to this country. And we're really intrigued about the topic tonight. Everything is connected to something else, and you will hear 7 very different perspectives on connections. And just before I thank our speakers by name, I know for a fact that there are members and officers of the Order of Canada in the audience. I see your snowflake pins from here. Please stand or raise your hand so we can recognize the members and officers of the Order who are here not on stage tonight. Where are you? Hands up. There we go. I will remind you about this at the end of the evening before we come together at the reception, that anyone can nominate any Canadian for the Order of Canada. The form is easy and it's online. And we'll talk, as I said, I'll remind you of that later. Now here's how the Walrus Talks works. Each talker has 7 minutes. There are 7 talkers for 7 minutes each. The lights will stay up. You each have a program in your hand. The interactive part here is they speak, you read. So the talkers are in speaker order on the front. If you flip it over, their bios are on the back. Please follow along. I do not pop up here like a jack-in-the-box in between and read it to you. They will each come up 7 in a row and they will introduce themselves. You will hear 7 in a row, and once your head is full of new perspectives, we will have lots to talk about at the post-talks reception, to which you are all invited. So just before I let our talkers get underway, I'd like to thank all volunteers in advance. Thank you to photographer Edward Burtynsky, singer-songwriter Susan Aglukark, founder and CEO of Shorefast and the innkeeper of the Fogo Island Inn, Zita Cobb, 5-time Olympian Charmaine Crooks, professor of medicine and neurology Dr. Sandra Black, host of CBC's The Next Chapter and chancellor at the University of Victoria, Sheila Rogers, and author and executive chairman of the Blockchain Research Institute, Don Tapscott. Much fun in store. Let us begin.
Thank you, Shelagh. It's amazing what you've done here. My name is Edward Burtynsky. I'm a photographic artist, and I'm lucky enough to be actually opening a show here next week called The Anthropocene with collaborators Jennifer Bachewell and Nick DePoncier. Also, the film will be premiering here at the National Gallery next Thursday and opening in Bytown Theatre on October 5th, as well as across the country. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you our trailer for the Anthropocene, the Human Epoch. So I'm going to start with that and give you a sense of what we're working on.
The Anthropocene is the time in the geological record when humans have moved the planet outside its natural limits.
Humans go from being participants in the whole Earth to being a dominant feature.
Dominating the oceans, the landscape, agriculture, animals.
It could be a full-scale catastrophic change.
We have not a way to get back. We live now in a different world.
It is such a fundamental change in the way the Earth is behaving that we need to communicate that as powerfully as possible to everybody.
A quick show of hands. How many have heard of the word Anthropocene before this? Wow, that's the best audience response I've ever seen. Congrats. But to make a film like this and to work with collaborators like Jennifer and Nick is about connecting with creative spirits who share a same vision, and then spreading that vision beyond and going to find the other people who can help us craft the ideas that we want. And the ideas that we want are also about connecting. We're very interested in showing the places in the world that we all partake of every day of our lives but never get a chance to experience. And really, that's where I began, and that's what the Anthropocene is trying to do, to show how we're reshaping the planet and how we're building systems to provide the natural resources on a scale that's almost unprecedented, or is unprecedented. And the tools and the technology that bring these things are amazing. So in the film and the exhibition, we're trying to bring all of these ideas forward. But when we're doing this, we're often asked, what can we do about it? Like, I'm just an individual. How do we begin to fix these problems? So as collaborators, we've sat down and thought, okay, of all the things we've seen, what are things that are an easier thing to do and a harder thing to do? So I'm going to start with the easier thing to do. And this is something that we can all do and share, and we're going to be saying this throughout the opening of the Anthropocene and trying to spread the word on radio and wherever we get interviewed. But the first thing we can do is do something about plastics, and something about plastics in Ontario particularly. So right now, I'm not sure if you're aware of this or not, but Ontario and Manitoba are the only two provinces that do not have a return deposit program on plastic bottles. Just to give you an idea, we recycle less than 11% of all plastics we produce in Canada. Most of them all the 50% end up in landfill, and the remainder are incinerated or end up in our lakes. 10,000 metric tons of plastic end up in our Great Lakes, and most of them are single-use bottles. And these bottles end up in our oceans. The estimate predicted plastic in our oceans in 2050, the scientists are saying it'll equal the biomass. So the weight of the plastic and the biomass of the ocean will be equal by 2050 unless we change our habits. In Ontario, we consume 3 billion plastic bottles per year. And Ontario has shown that it can be very successful in recycling bottles. Beer bottles have a 98% recycling rate. So we can do it. BC, in their return deposit, is able to get between 80 and 85% of the plastic bottles back off the streets. Also creates an underground economy as these bottles are collected and used by those who need support. In New Brunswick, they have one of the most sophisticated return deposit programs, and they're actually taking some of the proceeds of this and remediating water. And what a virtuous cycle is that? You're taking plastic bottles, and the ones that don't get actually recycled end up being the money that's left on the table that then goes to create a higher quality, better water. And one of the places you can actually go and sign a petition right now, because there's a big push on by the federal government and by the Environmental Defense. So there's a website called www.cashdon'ttrash.ca, and you can go there and voice your opinion. So now the other one's a little bit harder. Part of our work took us to ancient forests in BC, and if you have never been into an ancient forest in BC and seen those phenomenal redwoods, then you need to do that in your life. It should go onto your bucket list. But what we're suggesting is a national moratorium on ancient forests. We think that the scant amount of these ancient forests that are left need to be saved. And for instance, in BC, it's a shocking statistic. For all the wood that they're cutting, 50% of it's still coming from ancient forests, and less than 10% of those ancient forests are left on Vancouver Island. So it is a point where even when they go and selectively forest, it is diminishing that forest. The machinery that goes in there, it degrades that biomass. And the biomass that is at the forest floor of these ancient forests is not the same as a monoculture that's grown of let's say, Douglas firs. When they all go up at once, the biomass underneath becomes diminished. And I read this in Hardy Rusted's book. It says if a deer walks into one of those forests, it better pack a lunch. There's nothing to eat. So a replanted forest is a garden. It's not an ancient forest. And to lose those ancient forests is to lose that biodiversity. So again, it's a harder problem. There's a group of people we worked with in BC called the Ancient Forest Alliance. They're fantastic people. And again, go on, learn more about our ancient forests. In Ontario, we only have like 0.5% of the ancient redwood forests left. So they need to be fought for. They need to be protected. Thank you.
Yadamik Susan Aglukark yunga inu yunga akverminga nekublunga tagbanilak Ontario mi 25 years ingirtiu yunga pilreyo marlunga Arctic Rose Foundation meet. I am Susan Aglukark, originally from Arviat, now living here in Ontario. Singer-songwriter, executive director of and founder of the Arctic Rose Foundation. I'm going to speak briefly, obviously 7 minutes on it's not too late yet to get this Indigenous-Canada relationship right. We Inuit are an extraordinary people, still deeply grounded in a culture forged by our ancestors. Their journey shaped us and made us who we are today. Their life experience is the foundation on which our precepts of determination, adaptability, and love for life are built. They began the journey to our present-day Nunavut, or Inuit Nunangat. Our ancestors, through their 15,000-plus year journey, lay claim to Inuit Nunangat. Over those years, they forged the culture of reciprocity. Respect life, living thrives. Respect the human spirit, humanity thrives. Respect what land, water, and sky offers us, nurturing thrives. Our ancestors entrusted this tenet of reciprocity to us, the leaders, political, cultural, and social movement leaders. We who took on and take on this mantle of leadership took on the stewardship of its people, we the Inuit and our land, Inuit Nunangat. The question we must ask ourselves is the tenet of reciprocity being honored? Nunavut is a beautiful thing, but Nunavut is nothing without its people, and our people are struggling. Have we become so complacent that we have forgotten the tenets passed down to us by our ancestors and our elders? I sincerely hope not, because Nunavut is a living story which began many thousands of years ago. It is Canada's oldest story, and our children and youth need a chance to contribute to this story so that they feel a sense of ownership in their culture. But they have a lot of waiting to do through many layers of trauma before we can get to that storytelling. How do we help? The how and the why of the struggle is clear. The how of the struggle was the acts of colonizing and the assimilation policy and the methods used, such as the residential school system. Part of the why of the struggle is the compounded trauma, including the inhumane choice to ignore the reported effects during and since that time to our respective Indigenous cultures. These effects directly contribute to the disintegrating of our collective emotional, physical, and psychological states. The acknowledgement of these is one step, and there is a lot of great work being done now to work towards healing, such as the work we are seeing being done by the ITK, Embraced Life Council, and other groups. And those are the incredible connections we are making as different organizations to work towards healing, but we need to do more, and we need to do it urgently. It's not too late to set ourselves on a true healing and recovery path. We have many great groups and organizations working towards the same goal, but whatever process we are working on, it must include culture. As much as Nunavut is nothing without its people, Canada is not Canada without its Indigenous people and our respective cultures. And we have a lot of great pre-contact stories and histories that we can draw from so that we can work from there to create recovering and healing paths. Shouldn't the narrative be corrected and rewritten by us? We are still very much connected to our respective cultures. For example, we Inuit still have access to traditional cultural resources in our northern communities. Resources whose stories and ways of being come from traditional Inuit ways. My parents' generation. My parents' generation of Inuit are the last generation to have true traditional memories. Their memories are the pieces that ground us Inuit to a fundamental sense of self, a self that could then form part of the simultaneous sojourning, a bridge between traditional self and contemporary self. While we make these connections, we can also be drawing from our generation. Those of us who have lived a semi-traditional lifestyle while learning to navigate and live in contemporary times and through the trauma of the residential schools. In this time, our emotional memories of both worlds, and in those memories are tools for us to draw from, to recover from our challenges in this current contemporary day. In this combination, the traditional memories of my parents' generation and my generation are incredible resources for doing research and documenting as one of the ways to fully understand the effects from our generational lived experiences. 2 generations of Indigenous who have and are simultaneously walking or sojourning. I am only one story. I have been able to work on myself, and in my time to date, I have been able to trace my struggle to a place early in my career when I was always afraid. Stuck between wanting something so strongly and afraid of this new want or desire, but also stuck waiting for someone to tell me wanting this deeply is normal and it's okay. I was able to come to trace this place of stuckedness to the emotional fears of recrimination or ilra, a state we come to as Indigenous by being constantly told until we accept it the narrative that our ancestors were a barbaric and uncivilized culture. I came to accept this narrative, and accepting it brought with it shame, adding to the compounded effects of colonization, and something I had to, while I was healing myself, also work through. When I came to understand all of this fear, or ilra, I was liberated from it enough to continue on my healing path. This is what I mean by we must understand the full effects of the methods used against us. I call this place we're in a state of suspended anticipation, a catch-all phrase for being emotionally bound to the negative effects of a narrative and the effects of empty and broken promises. Until we are released from these promises, we cannot heal. We cannot truly move forward. We are in an emotional state of suspended anticipation. It's not too late to understand enough these effects, and in fact, I think we are living in times when we can do amazing things together. We have graduated Inuktitut-speaking lawyers and researchers, Indigenous academics, incredible young leaders. Canada still has access to incredible Indigenous pre-contact stories, the stories that make Canada stand out from the rest of the world. It's not too late. Thank you.
My name is Zita Cobb, and I am going to be talking about economics for belonging. We seem to have created a world to which it is increasingly difficult to belong. Every day, individual people, companies, and communities are simply falling out of the story of the world. It's a kind of crisis of belonging and a crisis of meaning. And I think this has at least something to do with a crisis of value. And what I mean is that there is a broken relationship between the intrinsic or inherent value of things and their financial value. I'm going to illustrate what I mean by using an example from a small island off the coast of Newfoundland called Fogo Island. It is a place that we say is far away from far away. Perhaps a small island is a reasonable proxy for a small planet. Fogo Island was settled by Irish and English people starting in the 1600s. They came for fish, and they stayed for fish. Culture is a response to a place and to the natural environment of that place. On Fogo Island, a singular culture emerged over the centuries of fishing on the North Atlantic, and in that place, life was organized around ecological and social logic. This is the fish that was central to our physical and cultural lives. This is my father and me in 1961. I was 3, and he was 52. In 1961, he was still a proud man, a 7th-generation Fogo Islander who was a fisherman and a sealer, very adapted to his environment and very effective at supporting his family of 7 children. He had no trouble making meaning. He belonged to himself, to his family, to his community, and thus to the world. He used to say that nature knows everything, and he did his best to learn from its every gesture. When he was 60 and I was 10, his life collapsed. Monster ships from around the world had started to arrive in the mid-60s, and they very nearly took every last fish in the ocean. The inshore fishery that we had been a part of for centuries collapsed. We were no longer sure how we belonged to the world. My father died, never understanding why anyone in their right mind would fish night and day and catch nearly every fish in the ocean. He did eventually figure out that they were turning fish into money. My father's logic system was ecological and social. He had no understanding of economic logic. The collapse of the inshore fishery caused the forced resettlement of the majority of Newfoundland's coastal communities. But Fogo Island didn't resettle, because at that time the community found a way, with the help of the National Film Board of Canada and Memorial University, to invent an economy with a different logic than the globalized fishing industry. In 1967, Fogo Islanders created a cooperative that was owned by the community. That co-op still owns the fishery on Fogo Island to this day, and it is the reason we've been able to continue belonging to the world. After high school, I came to Ottawa to study business at Carleton because I wanted to understand what kind of logic, what kind of ideology controlled those monster ships. In first year, I got a job as a cashier at Goldstein's IGA on Elgin Street. And there I saw my first cauliflower, which changed the way I saw the world. Of course, a cauliflower is all about connections. It's a beautiful fractal. It's a pattern that repeats and repeats, and it works at any scale. It's a perfect example of nature's geometry and nature's logic. I realized then and there that Fogo Island is a tiny floret and Ottawa a bigger one, and that we are all bound together by the stem. The stem has two jobs. Number one job, hold us all together, and number two job, bring nutrition to the florets. Standing there in Goldstein's IGA, I realized that the fishing companies never accepted their responsibility to bring nutrition to the florets. I also realized that if I had a career in business, I'd be working in the STEM. The cauliflower became the lens through which I saw the world. It is a powerful way to think about relationships and connections. Relationships, for example, among and between the local, the regional, the national, and the global. Of course, it was the mid-70s, so like everybody else, I was reading Schumacher's Small is Beautiful. His wonderful sentence, "Our task is to look at the world and see it as whole," calls us to be aware of the impacts of our actions on the whole. On Fogo Island, we try very hard to be aware of what's going on around us, and we accept that life is precarious. We've been working to develop tools to help improve awareness of the economic nutrition that flows to the florets. Nutrition labels have been around since 1990, and they have greatly improved our awareness of what we're eating. We've borrowed from this idea to create what we call economic nutrition labels. An economic nutrition label simply tells you where the money you are spending goes. We put this label on everything we sell. Here, in this case, we have the economic nutrition label for the Fogo Island Inn. It tells you that 49% of what you spend to stay at the inn goes to the people who work there. 11% goes to food and supplies, and so on. 15% is the targeted surplus or profit that is returned to Shorefast, the charity that owns the inn, for reinvestment in the community. The label also tells you where the money goes geographically. The idea of the label is to help us as consumers spend our money in ways that provides nutrition to the things we value, for example, our communities. And this is the Fogo Island Inn, which is a 100% social business. The community is the beneficial owner. It exists to take care of our guests and to bring nutrition to the community. We also do economic nutrition labeling for our furniture business and for our hand-line cod business. You can see here that 69% of the money that we get for selling the cod goes back to Fogo Island. My father would like that a lot. We would like to see a world where everything offered for sale has an economic nutrition label. We think it would go a long way to strengthening community economics. My father would also be happy to know that the cod are slowly coming back, and that this generation of Fogo Islanders are still tangled up with the source of their culture. I will leave you with this quote from Jane Addams and give you a chance to read it. And close by saying that we do need to invest in our common life, which means to invest in our communities. Investing in communities is a powerful way to tackle the problems of meaning and belonging. And the best way to invest in communities is to build strong, community-centered economies. And the very happy news is that community-centered economies are economies for belonging and economies for true connections. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Charmaine Crooks, 5-time Olympian. You know, I'm feeling quite immersed in the heart of our great country here in Ottawa, and I have been completely honored to having represented Canada for 20 years as a member of the Canadian track and field team and as an Olympian and traveling the world representing Canada in many leadership functions in sport. My sport journey is one that is perhaps common in some respects to other high-performance athletes, or maybe to some kids in your own lives. Kid gets inspired by sport, asks parents to take them to practice, gets chosen maybe to join a team, wins a few races, and next thing you know, the kid is standing on a podium or getting medals or maybe even listening to their national anthem. And the adult in me now looks back and is grateful and is deeply honored and forever thankful to the supporters and community who have all played a small part, many in this room. And to now have this podium to share with you some insights from my world of sport and how these connections have provided and continue to provide a powerful tool to bring Canadians together. Well, the fast track is not exactly like this for everyone, which is why part of my life's work is finding new ways to help connect more Canadians to sport and to experience not just the joy of competition, but finding ways to connect us through a sense of community and national pride, unlike what any other sector does. So whether the vehicle is sport or entertainment or entrepreneurship or arts or culture or what have you, someone has been behind you. Someone has been behind your team. So how does sport specifically link us all? Well, through the simple pride that we often feel, or maybe reminders of how you felt when you saw the achievements or heard the names of the Olympians or Paralympians or heroes that might be in your own community, or maybe it was the name of your favorite hockey team. We know these names: Terry, Rick, Tessa, Scott, Sydney, Haley, and of course, maybe your local hockey team. And you know, the process of these achievements is the daily held belief that every single one of us feels through consistent hard work, tenacity, and training, and goals that can be accomplished beyond just having great genes. And we've heard the voices of sport through the many Canadians who have had leadership roles around the world. And having been privileged to have been one of them, starting from high school, through university as an advocate for women's sport, through the International Olympic Committee, and through now working with FIFA. All of these have given me an opportunity to see and to be part of connecting the universe to those universal true values of sport. So whether we have Canadians as advocates for safe sport, inclusive sport, tackling the tough issues of doping in sport, or advocating for greater equality for women in leadership roles, the voice of Canada has never been louder in these areas and has never been so important. And while there's still lots to do globally, we cannot take attention away from the desire to present more opportunities to our youth, especially our young girls from all diverse backgrounds, to get them on the fields and not simply observers from the fence line looking in, to connect them in a way that they can achieve their own goals and their own aspirations. Now, one link One connection, aside from the inspiration and support that many current athletes enjoy and certainly value, and some of the many initiatives that are happening right here in Canada, is asking why. Why value something that so many of us can't always relate to, or that we might not see as important in a world of so many other competing interests and lack of resources for many to have access to? Well, this is sport, and that's what we're all about. That's what we do. We compete, and when we compete and we're committed to creating a path, we will find a way to create those opportunities for unity and equality for others to have access to sport. Now, part of the how is reacting to emerging trends, and we're seeing them every day in the area of technology. We're looking to open up new and diverse sports and activities and hosting opportunities as well, and looking at how technology and how science can be a better enabler for the performance of the next generation, a welcome addition to existing ecosystem to deliver, monitor, and track our athletes' performance. And looking at that whole athlete, the mental health during and after transition. And having been a retired athlete, I can tell you, it's not always easy when the cheering stops. These connections on how we serve that journey are serving as catalysts for the greater impact we are seeing in sport. From the connected fan, to the connected venues, to the smart contracts, to the coaching, and the influencers in the landscape in non-traditional sports, and even our own health and wellness roadmaps that we wear on our arm. The connection between the virtual and the real has never been more linked. So while the advances have given us advantages in access, there are threats. No more fax machine workouts for me. Now we see threats to our personal information, our performance information, and we see the ongoing consequences of those who wish to take shortcuts to the podium. And our podium is now more than a podium. It's an important and vital platform to advocate, to be seen, to call action to, and most of all, to connect to society on issues at a deeper and more personal level. But my hope is that the true connections can start in every child's life who wishes to be active or desires to learn more of the universal lessons of which sport has done for me and countless others. I hope that never goes away. I hope that those connections to the values of fair play, respect, friendships are the reasons why athletes like me, 120,000 known living Olympians, continue to take this journey and many more. So the reasons why today and every day we reach into diverse corners and areas of our vast country to create new and enhance old connections for the betterment of all communities and for the opportunity to build on the Canada we desire is the reason why I connect to sport. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Sandra Black. I'm a physician and researcher at Sunnybrook Hospital at University of Toronto, and I'm just delighted to be here amongst this distinguished group of speakers and in front of this wonderful audience. I just wanted to start on a personal note because I come from Sault Ste. Marie. My mother was an ardent and tireless community activist, and her contributions were recognized with an Order of Canada in 1985 when she was 68 years old. She continued to be very active, cross-country skiing, and engaged in many social activities until her 90s when her memory started to slip, and she eventually died of a stroke. So I study stroke and dementia and take care of patients with these problems, but I learned from my mother about caregiving. And this is something that's increasingly going to be an issue for all of us because of population aging. How many people in the audience know somebody with dementia or are caring for someone with dementia? Yes. So these are the trends that are in front of us. Now, if I point, I have to point this way. Okay. I'm a clinician, I teach with slides, so please put up with me. But here are some of the important points. So aging, of all risk factors for the common causes of dementia, such as Alzheimer's disease, stroke, and Parkinson's disease, is the most important risk factor. 10,000 baby boomers are reaching 65 years of age every day in the US. And for the first time ever, I think this is really a striking comment, in developed countries, adults have more parents than children. You can see the trends, here in terms of 2000 and 2050. So I'm not going to go through all the details of these slides, but just highlight a few things. It's there for those of you who have time to look at the slides afterwards. They include these enormous increases expected in terms of percentage increase in all parts of the world. Europe, 90%, Africa, 300%, going from 44 million people with dementia currently up to 135 estimated by 2050. One person diagnosed with dementia every 4 seconds, but a lot of people are not diagnosed, so it's even more than we think. An annual cost of $604 billion in 2010, expected to be well over $1 trillion by 2030. The Canadian landscape is currently about a little over maybe 800,000 or more Canadians living with Alzheimer's-related dementias, and that'll be double to 1.4 million, certainly by 2030. That's the estimate. In fact, each decade, the percentages go up. So by age 85, which is starting to be the average life expectancy in Canada, 60% will have cognitive impairment. About 25% are actually demented. Now, what do we mean by dementia? Dementia means that you have cognitive problems that are sufficient to cause you to need help, to be dependent, and need assistance in daily life. And there are 100 causes of dementia, but the commonest ones tend to be Alzheimer's and stroke. So let's just look quickly at some of the patterns that we can see now with current clinically available techniques. First of all, this is what the brain looks like at the end of the period of suffering of Alzheimer's disease compared to a normal brain. And you can see that there's a lot of shrinkage with a little sparing in the sensory motor areas. Plaques are made of amyloid, tangles are made of tau. These are present in the brain of people with Alzheimer's disease. And the part of the brain that's most affected is the memory area, shown right here. This is called the hippocampus because it looks like a seahorse. That's what you want it to look like. That's what you see in Alzheimer's disease. The new developments that have come, I'll just show you that hippocampus showing this little, let me see, can I go back? So that's those two little tiny structures in the brain. That's where you make memories. And when that starts to go, you stop being able to associate information and learn new information. Now we can actually see those tau and amyloid deposits in the brain with something called PET imaging. And you can see different patterns. This is what the tau tangles look like, the red areas, whereas the amyloid fills in different parts of the brain. It deposits in the brain as the brain is deteriorating. So with imaging, we can see a lot about the different types of dementia, and I'll just point out, besides Alzheimer's disease and healthy aging, here's a loss of tissue in the front part of the temporal lobes, and this is associated with loss of language, understanding of words, and when the right side is affected, loss of the ability to recognize faces and objects. Here you can see that the front of the brain, the front of the brain is affected, and here the back of the brain is affected. That's frontal temporal degeneration. That's an atypical type of Alzheimer's disease. Here you see white matter changes and little black dots. Amyloid actually gets into the blood vessels as well, and it can cause microhemorrhages. And in fact, the brain is a vascular network, not just a neural network. Mileage, lots of miles of arteries. And vascular damage, just strategically located, shown in this one little spot here in the thalamus, can lead to instant dementia. You lose language, abstract thought, and short-term memory. Here's an example on the CT where there's a blood clot caused by amyloid in the vessels and leads, in this case, led to specific problems with language and vision. But Alzheimer's disease is also a cause of hemorrhage, a cause of stroke. So these are, talking about connections, these are connected pathologies. So, sorry, I almost lasered somebody there. So the vascular risk factors mean that we can help prevent cognitive decline if we can control them. And some of these we can't control, like age and genetics, but blood pressure, diet, physical activity, some of those are lifestyle choices that we can make, and we can make a difference to our future brain health, as well as medications and other means to help us control some of those other risk factors. So collaboration must be the new norm across healthcare and our social system. We need teams across healthcare, research pillars that are interdisciplinary. We need funding and care agencies to stop being in silos and start to work together to make us all address this enormous challenge, apart from global warming, plastics in the ocean, all the other things that you've heard that are so depressing, and it's going to get worse when you hear the last speaker. So the other thing I learned through my mother's experience is engagement of persons living with dementia and care partners is going to be essential as we plan the future. I think Indigenous people have taught us that very really, and diversity and equity must be part of our thinking. We will have electronic patient records that can chart the patient's journey through the healthcare system, and because we're a single healthcare system, payer healthcare system, we can become a continuous quality improvement a project with kind of a learning healthcare system if we do it right. We have wearable devices that are going to allow us all to know about ourselves on a daily basis, what our activity levels are, what our vital signs are, how we slept. Even mood fluctuations can be followed and people supported when they're getting in the danger zone of, say, bipolar up and down disorder. Artificial intelligence and machine learning will allow us to analyze these incredible data sets, and maybe also as a country to begin to contribute internationally, because I can tell you we're underfunding research in a very significant way compared to other countries. But the Internet of Everything brings all the dangers that you will hear about security and privacy protection, and so we have to balance privacy with public good. Finally, we do have a Canadian National Dementia Action Plan, the last in most of the developed countries, and it will be focusing on preventing cognitive decline and preserving optimal brain health through various interventions. We do have a national network, research network, where people are synergizing and working together. But we really do have to invest more, I think, in early detection, robust, personalized approach to allow us to take advantage of disease-modifying therapies. We will be able to treat these diseases, but we have to get them early before people are sick. We have to get people in their pre-symptomatic stage, and that's already happening. By strategic use of biomarkers to identify when the disease is there and it's still silent. Since Alzheimer's and silent or overt stroke are diseases that occur together, in fact, they're the commonest cause of dementia, it's together, optimizing vascular risk factors, lifelong daily exercise, healthy diet should be key societal and personal goals for us all to optimize the chances of a healthy aging brain. These are acknowledgements, and I do thank also my institution, colleagues, and students for all the support I've had over many, many years. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Sheila Rogers. I don't know why that's funny, but and I have been a broadcast journalist at CBC Radio for approximately 400 years. It is a great honor to be with you in this hall this evening, and a great honor to be among the speakers whom you're hearing. I would also like to acknowledge the honor of being on the unceded territory of the Algonquin people. This means a lot. I could tell you about Connection. I could say, go home and read a book, and thank you, good night. However, I still have 6 minutes. And my topic this evening is personal. To begin, a confession. I am dog crazy. Over the last 25 years, I've had a St. Bernard, I've had a Beagle, a Dachshund Border Terrier Cross, and 5 Schnauzers, but not at the same time. I did have a fabulous female Schnauzer named Poppy. She was my bitch, okay? Truly, my associate. And when she died, friends sent condolences, and here is one of those kind messages. Poppy only ever knew love and only ever expressed it. She only ever knew joy and only ever expressed that. She was a friend, an ally, a warmth on cold nights, an unwavering gaze when things needed sorting out. She learned enough and gave enough and now continues on her marvelous journey of becoming more, just as all creatures do, even us. You will feel her in the rain, in the wind, in the bite of snow, in deep and penetrating silence when you stand out on the land. So you might miss her terribly, but you'll never be far away from her. That is what spirit is all about. It never leaves us, ever. My longtime friend and chosen and adopted brother, Richard Wagamese, wrote that. I never thought I would be applying those words, those large-hearted words, to Richard himself. Richard died about 1.5 years ago. And I really struggled with this notion of connecting to spirit and how it never leaves us. I was too embroiled in anger and what Richard called the cage of sadness. I festered in it. And then some really strange things started to happen. I would be going through emails and realize, oh my goodness, there's an email from Richard I haven't opened. And then there were phone messages I hadn't heard. The iCloud started downloading old photos of him that I thought had vanished. And then some of the books he'd given me, I would see coffee rings on the cover if they were held in a certain light. And the man loved his coffee. Richard Wagamese, a man and his coffee, a love story. And these episodes started to open up a third ear, if you will. Richard seemed to be peering over death's transom. And then I found a draft of a manuscript of what would be his final novel, Starlight. I'd never opened it, and what a gift from beyond this story is. Starlight was published last month, and Richard is now moving among us and moving us with his great gift of story. Frank Starlight returns from his previous novel, Medicine Walk, and it's 10 years later, and Frank and his buddy Eugene Roth are working the farm that Starlight has inherited from the person who raised him, not his father, but a man he called the Old Man. Frank's intense study of nature and his comfort out on the land have made him a keen observer of nature, and he's developing a reputation as a wildlife photographer. Into his serene life enter a couple of strangers, tried and true in novels, Emmy and her daughter, fleeing Emmy's violent ex-boyfriend, a psychopath who is hunting Emmy and her daughter down. Richard's writing is crisp, sparing, and luminous. Starlight contains multitudes. Chapters contain novels. It's a masterpiece. You are reading it, and you don't want it to end. And it doesn't, because Richard didn't finish it. The last scene he wrote is a cliffhanger that he would have resolved. In the published book, his editor, Anita Chong, included a scene that is believed to be what Richard would have written had he been able to close Starlight himself, and it's a beaut. I believe Frank Starlight is Richard's alter ego. I feel Richard's humor, his Kreskin-like power of observation, his peace out on the land, his capacity for love, and the way he listened. And there's a section in Starlight about listening. He says to Emmy, imagine there's a point of light between your eyebrows. Focus on that. Push your attention toward it. And when you feel like you're there in that space, start listening to the sounds around you. Don't force it. Stay in that small space and just listen. And so she tries it. And Frank asks Emmy, how did it feel? And she says, it felt like the inside of my head got bigger. He says it did, because you let yourself hear deeper. When you push your listening out, you can hear everything. You get connected to what you hear. When you're holding a book and reading the author's words, obviously this is a connection, and we are listening to their words. Richard understood this in a cellular way. He would say, when fan letters came in, it's such a wonderful thing to have the work fit so well in another's spirit. He was a great listener. To borrow a term from the Cree writer who's just been nominated for a Giller, Joshua Whitehead, he was a ferocious listener. He loved music, and now I pick Richard up on my antennae when I listen to people like Thelonious Monk or Little Miss Higgins or Rostropovich playing the Dvorak cello concerto, a piece of music that Richard said changed his life. He said, when I first heard it, I ached. It was the most sublime music I'd ever heard. It made me crave more for myself. His craving more for himself got him off the streets and into journalism, and then books like Indian Horse for Joshua, Runaway Dreams, and finally Starlight. His craving more led to great stories, and you all know the truth about stories. As Thomas King has said, that's all we are, and Richard knew that. Richard said, all that we are is story. From the moment we are born to the time we continue on our spirit journey, we are involved in the creation of the story of our time here. It's what we arrive with, and it's what we leave behind. We're not the things we accumulate. We're not the things we deem important. We are story, all of us. And what comes to matter then is the creation of the best possible story we can while we're here. You, me, us, together, all connected. And when we can do that and take the time to share those stories with each other, we get bigger inside and see each other. We recognize our kinship. We change the world one story at a time. Thank you.
My name's Don Tapscott, and for 4 decades, I've been an advocate of the digital revolution. And I wrote a couple of books in the 1980s that nobody read. I think my mother bought most of the copies. But in the early 1990s, I wrote a couple of books, one called Paradigm Shift, and in '94, I wrote a book called The Digital Economy, which they say was the first bestseller about the web. And 20 years later, I was asked by my publisher to write an anniversary edition, so I had to go read the book. And it was humbling. The book stood up pretty well. And I came to a number of conclusions that that's what's happened over the last couple of decades. Going forward, we're entering a whole new age with these extraordinary new technologies, machine learning technologies that do things they weren't programmed to do. Blockchain, new internet of value, where we can now trust each other to do transactions without an intermediary. And trust is achieved by cryptography and collaboration and some clever code. The Internet of Things and others that were mentioned. And I also concluded the industrial age is finally coming to an end. And overall, the book was quite upbeat, but the subtitle was Promise and Peril in the Age of Networked Intelligence. And I did write a little section on the dark side, things that could go wrong. And when I reviewed every one of them, check, 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 all of them had gone wrong. So I'm going to talk about 4 of them tonight. There's a long list. And to kind of give you my views about what is to be done to go forward. The first was, I said there's a danger that we'll lose our basic right to privacy and that a small handful of people will capture our data. Well, that kind of happened. I've been referring to it recently as digital feudalism. Remember, before capitalism all around the world, we had the feudal system. You didn't work for a wage. You were tied to the land. You grew a bunch of vegetables, but the feudal landlord expropriated them all, and you got to keep a bit. Well, today, we all create the new asset class. It's called data. And this is perhaps the most important asset class ever. We create it, but it's expropriated by all these landlords, and you get to keep a couple of cabbages. And that's a big problem, because first of all, it means that you can't use this data to plan your life. Secondly, it means that these huge fortunes have been created, and we now have a bifurcation of wealth. We have this crazy thing that's happening where our economy is growing and the middle class is shrinking throughout the developed world. We have wealth creation and declining prosperity. But also our privacy is being deeply undermined. And people say to me, well, Don, privacy's dead, get over it. I think that's ignorant. Privacy is the foundation of freedom. And all this data constitutes our identities. We need to get them back so that we can manage them responsibly for ourselves and protect our basic rights. How are we going to do that? How are we going to create a self-sovereign identity that each of you own your own data? Under the industrial age, we achieve prosperity through a job. And you have full employment, you have prosperity. Well, that's not happening now. And furthermore, get ready for a new wave of extraordinary technologies that will violate Schumpeter's law of creative destruction, which I always believed in. You know, technology comes in and wipes out old jobs, but it creates all these new ones. The #1 job type for men in the United States is truck driver. Well, that's going to be gone in 10 to 15 years, not in 50 years. There won't be any truck drivers, for that matter. There won't be any drivers. The #1 job type for women is cashier. That'll be gone. But it's not just blue collar. Computers can diagnose patients better than doctors, and they can analyze x-rays better than radiologists, and they can dispense pharmaceuticals better than druggists. So how are we going to achieve prosperity? We have growing wealth and structural unemployment. That's inevitable in my mind that will happen. How are we going to solve that problem? In the book I said, I think the internet's going to bring us together. Because we're all going to have access to the same information. I said it could go the other way. I mean, you could have a fragmentation of public discourse. We could all follow our own point of view. And we could end up in these little self-reinforcing echo chambers where the purpose of information is not to inform us, but it's maybe to give us comfort for our preconceived point of view. Well, the way we informed ourselves as a society is collapsing. We have information overload. We now have this post-fact society where the President of the United States can tweet that his predecessor wiretapped him. Not only impossible, but a preposterous thing to say, and 30% of the population believes it. We now have close to 20% of Americans who think vaccinations are a dumb idea. I was talking to an epidemiologist at Davos last year who said that we're going to probably need another plague in America before we convince people that science is a good thing. So, how are we going to inform ourselves in a world where the old ways of doing that are collapsing? And back then, I wrote a whole chapter on the reinvention of government. I said, I think technology can reinvent government and create whole new models of democracy. Is there anyone here who thinks technology has transformed government for the better? Some of you are still trying to get a paycheck. Trust is at an all-time low in our institutions. And we arguably have a crisis of legitimacy of our democratic institutions. Seymour Martin Lipset, the great American sociologist, talked about legitimacy as the idea that you may disagree with who's in power, but at least you think the institution, like democracy, is a legitimate one. Fewer and fewer people do these days. Many young people are not voting. Voting's been declining amongst youth for 15 years. A lot of young people agree with the bumper sticker, "Don't vote, it only encourages them." And it's kind of funny, but it's actually not, because the alternatives to democracy are quite terrifying, and they're growing all around the world. So how can we move beyond this first era of democracy where we created these representative institutions, but there was a weak public mandate, citizens were inert, there was opacity? How can we move to a second era based on public deliberation, a culture of active citizenship, transparency, good government, smart votes, where governments are actually accountable to citizens, rather, say, in the United States, to the big funders who put them in power? So, Houston, we have a problem. These are 4 of a whole bunch of issues. When we moved from the agrarian age to the industrial age, we developed over time a new social contract. We figured out people need to be literate. So we created the public education system, created a law. You have to go to school. It's against the law not to go to school. We figured out people are going to live in the cities, are going to need a social safety net. We figured out you can't have one oil company owning all the oil, created anti-monopoly legislation. We did a whole bunch of things that together constituted a social contract. Well, what's the social contract for the digital age look like? I think we need to build a new one. And to do that, in Canada, we haven't had a Royal Commission in a long time. We should have a 21st century digital Royal Commission engaging millions of Canadians in thinking through a new social contract. What are our basic rights in the digital age? What kind of new institutions and new directions and new policies do we need to ensure that this smaller, more connected world that our children inherit is actually a better one? People say to me, or ask me, what's the future going to bring? I'm of the school that the future is not something to be predicted, it's something to be achieved. Now is the time to come together as a country and to connect and to achieve a new future. And maybe this digital age will be an age where the promise is fulfilled and the peril is unrequited. Thank you very much.
I didn't think that was so depressing, Dr. Black. Poor Dawn coming up here. Anyone under 30 is saying, what's a royal commission? What is that? Is it like the royal wedding? A little thing on your head? No. So I would like you to join me, once I've said all of their names, in thanking all of our speakers. Don Tapscott, who is currently the 4th most influential management thinker in the world, according to Thinkers 50. Who are the other 3? You're number 2 now. Who's the other one? Sorry. And he is the CEO of the Tapscott Group and the best-selling author of Wikinomics, The Digital Economy, Blockchain Revolution, and a dozen other books on technology, business, and society that some other people have read, and are also available at our book table out there in the lobby. Thank you to Shelagh Rogers, who, aside from hosting her own show on CBC Radio and being the Chancellor at UVic, in her spare time, Shelagh is also the ambassador for the Canadian Canoe Museum. Yes, that's what she does. The Canadian Canoe Museum, I know it's an awesome thing, is actually undergoing a capital campaign now for a new, gorgeous, green, accessible, educational museum on water this time in Peterborough. The canoe, especially for Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in Canada, is a big symbol of connections. And Dr. Carolyn Hislop of the Canadian Canoe Museum is with us tonight. Where are you? Where are you? There she is. Welcome. Shelagh, your ambassador, sitting right there. Thank you to Dr. Sandra Black from an Order of Canada family. What I took away from you is we need to keep on making memories so that we have a lot of them in there, right? Is that what we should do? Yes. And thank you to Zita Cobb. Visit Fogo Island. I have. It's extraordinary, a place far away from far away. I'll never look at a piece of, or a cauliflower the same ever again. And similarly, while you're at Fogo Island, it's not that far to hop over and visit the place where Susan Aglukark is from. You can support the Arctic Rose Foundation, but you can also support Susan and the Inuit by supporting Inuit hunters. Buy seal, wear seal. Seal is good. And last but not least, Ed Burtynsky. As he mentioned, Anthropocene is opening here at the National Gallery and at the Art Gallery of Ontario on the very same day, I think September 28th. Oh, I forgot Charmaine. Second last but not least, Ed Burtynsky. Sorry, Charmaine, I'm getting there. So Anthropocene opens here and at the AGO on September 28th. The film, you saw the trailer, Anthropocene opened at TIFF. I think it opens here in a week. The book is also coming out, and we're thrilled to tell you that the next cover of the Walrus, our November issue, will be one of the images of Ed's show at Anthropocene, and he is, the Walrus will also feature a big photo essay by Ed. And in addition to all of that excitement, part of Ed's show is an augmented reality feature in which you can stand next to a tree called Big Lonely Doug, which some people think is my husband, whose name is Doug. No, Big Lonely Doug is a Douglas fir tree. One of the last ones left standing. It's a real tree. And Walrus editor Harley Rustad wrote a book called Big Lonely Doug, and Ed did the jacket quote. This is a lot of connections, Ed. So this is all happening. Anthropocene, Big Lonely Doug, in the next couple of weeks. So please, please visit Anthropocene, watch the movie, and do all of those things. And finally, Charmaine Crooks, of the 120,000 known living Olympians, she is 5 of them. Thank you, all of our talkers. Now I'm going to hold the audience for a couple of minutes. I have a few things I need to discuss with you. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to ask our talkers to up and out to the reception first so you don't do that weird thing where you trap them in the front row and then they can't go to the bathroom or get a drink or anything. Thank you. Okay. This is our 95th Walrus Talks. That means there are now more than 600 7-minute talkers on our YouTube channel that you can watch whenever you want. You can just head to thewalrus.ca. You can also subscribe or donate at thewalrus.ca, but it's way more convenient to do it tonight at our little table right out there in the lobby where you can meet the Walrus team, Kaylin, Blair, Tina, Amay, Andrea, and they are all there. You can subscribe, you can donate, and tonight $20 for a full year of the Walrus. That's 10 issues. If you do it tonight, you will get that Burtynsky issue. That will be your first issue. And every dollar you donate to the Walrus tonight will be matched dollar for dollar by another member of the Order of Canada, Donald Ross, who is one of our greatest supporters. Yes. While you're out there, you can sign up for our newsletter. That's the free part. And you can make sure you don't miss any Walrus Talks. We'll be right back here at the National Gallery on October 16th. On the eve of legalization, we will be doing the Walrus Talks Cannabis. So get in line for that. We're also back on November 20th. I want to thank our national partners at Inspire, Shaw, and our local partners at the National Gallery and at the Hill Times. I would also like to thank our national partners at Venture Canada. They have a table out there tonight where if you fill in a ballot, they will enter you into a draw for some fantastic trip, possibly the Northwest Passage. I'm not sure, but they'll tell you which trip that you are eligible for. Thank you to the Order of Canada for making tonight possible. Sasha Richard of the Order and all of her colleagues are with us tonight. We hope to do more of these next year with the Order of Canada. Is that a good idea? It's a good idea. And this is the time when I remind you that you can nominate any Canadian for the Order of Canada. Please do. It's an amazing group of people, and you might know a volunteer or someone extraordinary in your community and someone who desires a better country. That's it. That's really all they ask for. So go to gg.ca/nominate and nominate someone today. So, also at the book table, I should say, Richard Wagamese's books are also there, so you can buy those. And please, everyone, join us at the reception where there's food and there's drink. If you're there, there will be good conversation. We believe the world needs more walrus, but remember, you are the walrus. Thank you for coming. Good night. Megwich. Merci.